Hello there, kia ora. I've had a number of people ask me recently if we're on the precipice of another brain drain, the kind that we saw, well, not that long ago, to be honest. And the answer is probably, and probably for the same reasons. If we take a look at migration numbers, for example, moving from Aotearoa to Australia, well, there was a really big bump in the middle of the John Key era. That's what that big bulgy part in the middle is there. And while there's been talk recently about New Zealanders up and leaving since the end of lockdowns, that uptick has nowhere near matched what we saw during the John Key era. And a lot of those policies that drove people to moving to Australia, well, they're back on the table again under the current government coalition, which means that we're kind of setting up the factors again to drive people overseas. There's actually three different areas that lead to brain drain. There's economic opportunities, there's political strife and stability, and there's persecution based around things like religion, gender, or sexuality. When it comes to that third one, that's not such a big driver in this country. Our laws are pretty similar in those areas. But if the government's going to keep letting people like Brian Tamaki get away with closing things down because he doesn't like the sound of them, maybe that'll change. And when it comes to political strife and instability, that's generally on a much larger scale than just a coalition of idiots who don't know what they're doing taking snips at each other. But when it comes to economic opportunities, that's what's going to be letting our economy down, our country, and driving these people overseas. It includes finding jobs that pay better for the same amount of work. All you need to do is talk to police officers or educators or people who work in the healthcare departments and health force. They'll tell you that the money you get in Australia for the same work is better. And while it might be taxed at a higher rate, and they might have things like a capital gains tax, it's still better off economically for them over there. There's higher standards of living when you deal with how much people get paid, how much they pay for services and goods, and how much they have access to things like housing, and healthcare is also a really big part of it. Getting onto the housing ladder in this country is incredibly difficult for a lot of people. It's far easier to do that across the ditch. And when you've got mass unemployment coming because the government's decided it needs to cut back on everything, and you've got all these really highly skilled individuals who are suddenly looking for work, finding that they get paid more for doing the same amount of work in a place that costs less to live, those are the factors that lead to a brain drain. So it is entirely possible we're going to see quite a bit of that over the next 12 to 18 months. But there are ways to reduce the impacts of brain drain and how to stop it from happening. That includes investments increased into certain areas of the economy, like building, for example, the construction sectors or infrastructure, offering competitive wages. And an offer like what the police force were given does not really fall into that category. There's paving the way for legal and social reform. But again, there's not a huge amount here that we don't do differently to Australia. But say rules around hate speech, for example, could have been the kind of world leading material that might help stem a little bit of that. There's also improving access to resources such as housing and healthcare, which is a constant bugbear that we're told needs to be sorted. But again, by cancelling builds like they have recently with Kāinga Ora, that doesn't help people at all. And providing affordable solutions to things like costs of living. But again, the government hasn't really done that, even though they said they would. They've really just tinkered around the edges, and they've increased the amount of taxes and the amount of paperwork and fiddling with all kinds of little elements that don't make life easier, so therefore bring down the quality of living. So when it comes to whether or not we can expect a brain drain out of this country into Australia, the answer is, yeah, fair dinkum, mate. You probably can.